Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, today we're doing something a bit different, but incredibly fascinating. We're taking a deeply analytical look at the deconstruction of a truly monumental sports moment. We always talk about the thrill of victory, right? But the anatomy of defeat, especially on the world's absolute biggest stage, offers a profoundly captivating story of its own. Through the information we've put together today, we're going to break down the final moments of the sporting giant. We're going to look at the exact seconds when an entire era ended, not with a trophy lift, but with absolute heartbreak. So if you want to understand how a massive legacy collides with raw human vulnerability, you are definitely in the right place. Number 1. Now, on the surface, this represents the final scoreline, a 1-0 victory for Spain that sent Portugal packing. But in the context of our explainer today, that number means something so much heavier. It represents the single, agonizing moment of defensive complacency that actually caused that goal. In a game of inches and split seconds, one single lapse in concentration at this elite level doesn't just cost you a match, it can literally cost you an entire legacy. That number 1, it's the tiny hinge upon which a massive door just slammed permanently shut. Okay, let's dive into this. The source material describes a crushing weight, hitting all at once. It wasn't some gradual realization where you slowly accept your fate. No, it was a sudden, violent collision with reality. I want you to imagine the absolute heaviest burden dropping right onto your shoulders the very millisecond a whistle echoes through a stadium. That is the exact, intense, emotional gravity we're analyzing today. The final whistle. 23. To truly grasp this, we have to set the scene of the immediate aftermath at AT&T Stadium. The air is thick with tension, right? And then the piercing sound of the referee's whistle didn't just signal the end of 90 minutes, it signaled the permanent, unchangeable finality of a lifelong dream. It really highlights the immense, almost incomprehensible disproportion between that single defensive mistake we just talked about and a massive 23-year international journey. Just think about that for a second. 23 years of early mornings, grueling training camps, nonstop international flights, and bearing the hopes of an entire nation, all of it coming to a sudden, permanent end because of one late goal. It is a staggering amount of time and effort to be erased by one fleeting mistake. It is astonishing amount of time and effort to be erased by one fleeting mistake. And what exactly was he doing for those 2 decades? Well, defying gravity, breaking records, and demanding absolute perfection from himself and literally everyone around him. We are talking about the immense historical weight of a legendary World Cup career. This wasn't just any player losing a match. This was one of the most relentlessly driven athletes in human history, realizing that his pursuit of football's ultimate prize was definitively over. A shattering realization. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can essentially freeze time. Emotional devastation of this magnitude rarely stays internal. It manifests physically. It breaks you down. By breaking down the emotional chaos into this structured, sequential timeline, we can observe the anatomy of a breakdown step by step. First, the whistle blows. That's the trigger. Second, he drops to his knees, the immediate physical collapse. Third, teammates offer comfort, the external environment reacting. And finally, the walk toward the tunnel, the exit. Breaking it down this way helps us process the absolute blur of that moment, just as the player was forced to. Let's zoom in on that second step, the physical collapse. The finality of the defeat completely broke him. He dropped heavily to the AT&T Stadium turf. And he didn't just sit down. The source notes he buried his face in his hands as this first wave of overwhelming grief took over. His chest heaved with sobs, and his shoulders shook uncontrollably under that iconic red jersey. This wasn't some polite, media-trained display of disappointment. This was a raw, unfiltered, bodily reaction to absolute grief. The agony of defeat. It's one thing to experience this level of devastation in private, but it's another thing entirely to experience it in a stadium filled with thousands of people, completely surrounded by an opposing team that has just achieved their ultimate dream at your direct expense. This brilliantly illustrates the emotional split on the pitch. The contrast is incredibly striking. On the left, you have the joyous, deafening celebrations of the Spanish players. On the right, you have a man completely shattered, weeping openly in the center of the pitch. The source material actually notes that the Spanish celebrations became this distant blur of noise to him. It's a stunning visual and auditory split. You have maximum jubilation happening mere yards away from solitary, crushing despair. Now, naturally, he wasn't entirely alone out there. Teammates and the coaching staff rushed to his side. They placed supportive hands on his back and offered quiet words of comfort. But the crucial detail here is that despite this support, Ronaldo was entirely inconsolable. He was literally sick with disappointment. The frustration of that late goal mixed violently with the realization that time had simply run out. And no words of comfort can wind the clock back. Listen to this specific phrase isolated from the source text. Heavy, ragged sobs. It really emphasizes the sheer intensity of the moment. We aren't talking about misty eyes here. The raw emotion of this ending poured out of him in a literal flood of tears. It's a powerful reminder of the deep human vulnerability that exists right beneath the polished, superhuman exterior of these elite athletes. As he sat there, peeking through his fingers, his eyes were bloodshot and filled with absolute heartbreak, just staring blankly at the grass. This is the look of someone trying to process an impossible reality. The grass beneath him is the very stage he had conquered so many times before, and now it's the site of his most painful professional conclusion. One last farewell. Okay, we're now looking at the moments right after he finally manages to pull himself up from the pitch. This is that long, agonizing walk toward the tunnel, effectively serving as his exit not just from the stadium, but from the grandest stage in international football. Notice the very specific, humanizing details here. When he finally pulled himself up, his face was wet. He kept his head bowed. He tried to wipe his eyes with the collar of his shirt in a completely futile attempt to hide his vulnerability. For a player universally known for his proud, almost invincible posture, this image of him using a shirt collar to hide his tears is a stark, moving contrast to the confident figure the world is so used to seeing. Let's look at the actual mechanics of this final walk. He slowly began looking up one last time at the roaring stands. The traveling Portuguese supporters who were literally witnessing the end of an era were chanting his name in consolation. In response, he offered a faint, tearful wave, his face completely twisted in pure grief. It's a deeply intimate exchange of sorrow between a legend and the fans he fought for over those 23 years. So the crucial point is captured perfectly in this quote. This is the ultimate summary of that tragic final image. One of football's greatest giants didn't leave the grandest stage of all, hoisting a trophy or waving victoriously. He left it not in a flash of glory, but in a quiet, devastating storm of tears. It totally subverts everything we expect from heroic sports narrative, reminding us that reality is often much more brutal and heartbreaking than the movies. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative question. Does a single agonizing moment of complacency erase a 23-year journey? I mean, of course, the history books will remember the records and the gravity-defying moments, but in the immediate, raw aftermath of a loss like this, the athlete feels as though absolutely everything has been wiped away by one mistake. It forces us as viewers to reflect on the unbelievably harsh reality of sports, where 2 decades of excellence can violently collide with 1 millisecond of failure. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this structured look has given you a much deeper understanding of the anatomy of this legendary exit.